Who can be against diversity, this incredible American experience of all of us with different backgrounds, races, religions, all of it? Equity, making sure that we have an opportunity to invest, to lift people up who have been most disproportionately harmed and impacted. And inclusion, making sure everyone has a seat at the table so that our policies, our decision-making is inclusive of all those voices. It's what's made America great. Literally, it's who we are, and this state's gonna uphold that. So to all of our districts, keep focusing on your DEI work. Make it a point of pride, lean into it as you have for decades and decades. I know there are school boards around the state who want to go with President Trump in places where it's not actually his legal authority. No president gets to take away money from a state by themselves. They just don't get to do that because Congress is the one who's made those appropriations. We will push back when we know it's inappropriate and illegal. We will be in courts when we absolutely have to. Greetings, I'm Chris Reykdal, Superintendent of Public Instruction for the beautiful state of Washington, back with another video here for you all. If you tuned in last time, you know that we try to catch everybody up on what the law actually says on a host of issues that are currently in the news and impacting our state. President Trump has declared through executive orders and some other actions, political preferences that he has, things he'd like to see happen. And our job here at OSPI is to serve the people of the state of Washington under state law where it conforms with federal law. So while there are lots of folks out there with a ton of emotion around issues that tend to feel political or rural-urban divides or Washington, D.C. versus Washington state, our goal is to get everyone in a common place around what the actual laws say, how our state will be implementing laws, federal and state, and who has the authority. Let me be super clear here. I know there are school boards around the state who want to go with President Trump in places where it's not actually his legal authority. That will all get settled in the courts in due time, and I don't judge folks for their political choices or representing their communities. That's what they were elected to do, and I deeply respect that. But in this state, we have to follow our state laws, our civil rights protections, and let the courts handle where there's conflict. So today, I just want to review again some of the key issues that have come before us. Immigration, whether or not the federal government can take money from our state if we don't follow their definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to talk a little bit about Title IX and make sure everyone understands where that sits right now with respect to gender and gender identity. And then there's some new things that are coming on the horizon now that we have a U.S. Secretary of Education that's been confirmed by the Senate. Sometimes words, though, just don't get it done. For me, I like a picture. I like to see an example of what I'm talking about. So we're going to take it to the whiteboard today. I'm going to walk through some concepts there that I hope will give you another way to understand the federal state differences and where there might be some gray area. Let's take it to the whiteboard. So this is the complicated moment we find ourselves in. Lots of misunderstanding around presidential authority, congressional authority, and states' rights. Let me start by keeping it simple. Those things not very enumerated, clearly laid out in the Constitution, or where Congress hasn't stepped in with detail, that is the right of states. That's what the 10th Amendment says. Education has always lived in that space. Yes, Congress has adopted civil rights protections, and it's really important that we uphold that. But our state, and any state, gets the ability to add additional protections. We can go beyond the federal minimums. So in education, whether it's student evaluation, teacher evaluation, civil rights protection for our students, how we deploy in our schools, how many school districts we have, all of that is our state legislature, this constitutional office of OSPI, and a legal opportunity for our local boards to then execute those state laws and those state expectations. Again, there's some federal law around it that's come in, and we uphold that, but the driving force of education in this country is the states. But let's spend a little time right here. Congress clearly has the authority in the U.S. Constitution to make laws, and the most powerful tool that they have is the budget. So no president gets to take away money from a state by themselves. They just don't get to do that because Congress is the one who's made those appropriations. That's the first and most important thing, because we hear a lot of school districts say, I want to follow President Trump because I either believe in him politically or I'm worried I'm going to lose my money. I understand that risk, and I know you're representing your communities, and it's so important that you do, but the first obligation we have as elected officials when we take our oath is not just to the US Constitution, but the state constitution and state laws. And in this case, education is almost entirely a state function. So our boards and our communities, they have to protect state law, and that's what we're doing. Getting on the same page about that, putting the politics aside, what do we have to do here? Congress has established appropriations, so we're not doing anything except following our state policies, leaning into our protections and making sure that our students, our communities have the best opportunities, because that's what our state has established. The President of the United States clearly gets authorities. The best example is the Constitution gives the President the ability to be the head of our US military. No one questions that the President has the ability to send us into war or conflict because he's the head of our military. The Constitution makes that clear. What's so difficult about presidential executive orders and presidential power is that there's this gray area where Congress sets laws, but they've actually given more authority beyond the Constitution to the President. That's a little bit of the area that we find ourselves in. Yes, Congress has set up civil rights protections for students. Can a president of the United States make detail about that? Can they define things? Probably not. It will go to courts, there's no question about it. But right now, the law is on the side of Washington State and all of the states to make this determination. Presidents don't get to make declarations of legal consequence just because of their political ideology. Only when the Constitution gives them explicit authority or where Congress has given them explicit authority. That's why this moment is so difficult. So to everybody, I would say, just think about it as a continuum between congressional power, presidential power, where the Constitution gives Congress, particularly the budget authority, it's clear. Where the Constitution gives the president authority, military engagement and other things, it's clear. This area in the middle, very difficult. Think of tariffs, for example. The Constitution does not give the president the ability to set tariffs, but nobody really questions it because the US Congress has not set details about that. It's a gray area in which they've said the president probably can, and the presidents for decades have done that. So this is where it's going to end up getting to the courts. There'll be a lot of conflict around this. We need to brace ourselves for that. What this state will do is lean into the fact that our state rights are paramount, that we will follow civil rights laws when the US Congress has established it, and we will protect the dollars that we get in this state to uphold those laws because no president can take them away. So this is kind of the basic setup for all of us here to think about. I want to go back through about 4 or 5 issues that we've been talking about for weeks in the state of Washington and across the country in this context. I hope it helps. Let's take a look at a couple of those issues in a little bit more detail now. So let's talk about these issues. One of the first executive orders was on immigration. Nothing has changed. We're going to protect our students. Our state constitution says every student residing here gets a basic ed. Federal courts have consistently said that all students residing in any state get access to basic education. So we've got guidance for that. Thank you, school districts, for upholding that guidance and focusing on the protection of our students. So the second thing is we got this thing that's not even the power of an executive order. It's much weaker than that. It's called a Dear Colleague letter. This came from the U.S. Department of Education. This was on this threat of taking away federal dollars from our state or any state who doesn't uphold the president's version of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've sent guidance out about this. Again, thank you, districts who have followed that guidance very clearly. Nothing in that requires our state to back away from our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as I've said before, just say those words out loud to yourself. Who can be against diversity, this incredible American experience of all of us with different backgrounds, races, religions, all of it. Equity, making sure that we have an opportunity to invest, to lift people up who have been most disproportionately harmed and impacted. And inclusion, making sure everyone has a seat at the table so that our policies, our decision-making is inclusive of all those voices. It's what's made America great. Literally, it's who we are, and this state's going to uphold that. As I mentioned on the whiteboard, this is a space where Congress has made appropriation, and most of the time, courts will not let a president tear down funding, even grants to states. But we'll be looking out for this because we know the U.S. Department of Education has been given an assignment to pull down some money. We'll be watching it closely to see where they have discretion, and maybe they can. But most of the time, where Congress has acted definitively, the U.S. Department of Education and the White House cannot take those dollars away. Certainly not without a very clear process to describe why a state might be in violation of some law. So to all of our districts, keep focusing on your DEI work. Make it a point of pride. Lean into it as you have for decades and decades as a way to lift up students. It matters a ton, and we have investments from those who need additional language access to those who need supports with a disability to so many other places that have made our state successful. The third one is this Senate action that recently occurred. This is about the entire issue of transgender athletics and activity engagement. We talked about this before. We have guidance to school districts continue to follow our state laws and our state civil rights protections. Again, back to the whiteboard, a president can't really be in this space because Congress clearly established Title IX. And they know this because they took an action to Congress recently and it failed. It needed 60 votes to move through the US Senate. It only got 51 votes. So Congress knows they have to act. They know they're the authority here, not the president or the White House or the US Department of Ed. That action failed. It's another very clear affirmative response that the states get to decide civil rights protections beyond the bare minimum of Title IX. And in this state, we've established those protections for kids. And what's amazing is we've established a privacy right for all students, regardless of who they are, regardless of how they identify. They all have access to privacy choices when they seek them in our schools. The fourth issue is this new order that came out recently where the president declared that English is the official language of the United States. Okay, it's an opinion of the president. There's no law about this. Again, back to our whiteboard, this matters so much. Congress might adopt a law and they might ask states to do something different, and we'll conform to that. We'll follow the law, but there isn't one now. So it's the preference of the president or any president to say this or not. It absolutely doesn't change the fact that this state and most states invest in dual language programs. They invest in programs to help migrant families and communities and students improve their English. We have a legal obligation in the state to provide materials when requested by families in a language that they speak as their primary language. We are a beautiful nation of immigrants, and we are not walking away from that in Washington state. The president even made clear in his order, this doesn't change laws, it's his preference. And we're going to keep leaning into Washington state's deep, rich history of embracing immigration, building English skills, but also giving more and more kids the chance to grow up bilingual. We now have 50,000 elementary school students in this state learning a second language while they learn their core stuff, math and science and everything else, and they're learning it in 2 languages along the way. We're going to keep making Washington state one of the most amazing places for folks who want to be globally competitive and culturally responsive. And we're going to do that by leaning into what we've done in Washington for a long time, which is lean into our immigrant communities, lean into our diversity programs and our language programs. That leads me to this last and complicated issue. There's more coming. We'll likely spend some time in a future conversation around the new U.S. Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. She was confirmed by the U.S. Senate. She is our U.S. Secretary of Ed. Clearly, the president has given her and all of his cabinet an assignment to go find savings. We will follow that process closely. I will remind you that the department themselves has very little authority to cut budgets from states, no matter what they say. That isn't what the law allows. But we're being very careful here because there are some discretionary dollars where they get choices, and we'll honor that if they make reductions there. It will impact our schools. What they don't get to do is tear down programs that Congress has clearly established, especially when Congress built the funding formulas. In our state, 3 of them are bigger than everything else combined when it comes to federal dollars. What we call Title I, these are dollars for high poverty communities that need more assistance. Number 2 is meals for our students. It's not a huge share of money, but it's a big program federally. It actually comes to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And the third one is supporting our students with disabilities. Again, our state contributes about 80 to 85% of the funds for that, and Congress is only about 15% of the money right now, but it still is a sizable portion. So between those 3 big programs, Congress appropriated the money to states. They set the formulas. We're going to continue to follow federal and state law about that. And no one gets to take that away without Congress acting. If they choose to try that route, then we will be in court with them. So stay tuned with that. We understand the Secretary has an assignment. We're happy to talk about efficiencies along the way. I think there are lots of ways the U.S. Department of Education could be smaller and more efficient and send more resources to the states. especially, and you've heard me say this before, especially in a state like ours that's contributing $22.5 billion every year more in our federal taxes than we get back. There's always room to reinvest in states like ours. I'm game for the conversation. We'll keep everyone up to speed on how that goes. We will push back when we know it's inappropriate and illegal. We will be in courts when we absolutely have to. Thanks for tuning into this video. Appreciate your attention. Share this with folks. We don't have to agree with each other on these issues, but we have to agree on the law and we have to follow the law. Otherwise, we don't have a democracy. The last thing I'll say is these are easy moments for us to lose our civility, to dehumanize other people, whether it's a state superintendent, a president, a U.S. Ed secretary, a school board member. Please, I ask everybody to understand we're all just putting our best foot forward as Washingtonians and as Americans. We can be in total disagreement around a policy and still treat each other with dignity and respect, because that's how we'll get through hard things. If we focus on that, we also show our students a model of what civic action looks like. Disagreement, ultimately getting to agreement, and ultimately moving forward together. Our students are asking us to be the adults in the room, and we need to do that. So thanks again for tuning in. Stay tuned for an update here before too long on any of the changes that come from the federal government, any changes our legislature might make, and certainly any actions from the U.S. Department of Ed, especially if we think they're going to put any resources at risk in Washington State. Thanks for being with us.